Doccy B from the Ministry of Eco-Education, and I'm going to give you a 5-minute update on the latest evidence of climate literacy in school leavers in England. Now, this report was commissioned by the Department of Education and it was released in December 2024, just before Christmas. It looked at the survey responses of 522 Year 11 students just coming to the end of Key Stage 4 and their GCSE. So a tiny fraction, but quite important to look at the results. So the Royal Meteorological Society and Ipsos put together 55 questions on the causes of climate change, evidence, impacts, mitigation, adaptation, climate change in the UK, and communication of climate change. The questions weren't linked to a specific curriculum, and many of the students who took this would not have done GCSE geography, but they should have done climate change as part of their Key Stage 4 studies for GCSE science. But only 55% of them recalled any recent climate change education. 17% said they couldn't remember when they last learnt about climate change. So maybe it's not being given quite the time it needs to make sure it's impactful. The majority didn't know or overestimated the extent of global warming since 1850. 31% said they didn't know. 15% thinks it has risen by 3 degrees already. Whereas according to the Meteorological Society, the correct value is actually 1.1 degree. We know that 2024 was nearer 1.5 degrees, but it might be a blip. So we're looking at the longer term trends. Half of the sample are either very concerned or fairly concerned about climate change. Young people care and they know that this is happening, but half of them, next slide, half of them, 49%, don't think that climate change will necessarily impact them personally. But actually, we know that it already is. If we go down to look for some tomatoes in the supermarket, sometimes there aren't any there, and that's because food supplies from Spain, where a lot of our salads come from, are already being impacted by bad droughts or severe storms and flooding. So we know that climate change is already affecting us, but young people aren't aware of it and don't even think it's going to impact them in their lifetimes. Only 31% understand that climate is the average weather conditions for a particular place and that weather varies a lot from year to year. Now, that should be covered in Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 geography, but obviously it's not having they're not recalling that information. They do, however, know that carbon dioxide and methane are 2 of the biggest greenhouse gases, and they're serious, and so that's good news. And more good news is that they understand that the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation and even natural sources such as volcanoes are contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions. And interestingly, only 10% think that rock weathering contributes, but actually rock weathering is a sink for carbon dioxide. So there's loads about nature-based solutions that we could look at that might be meaningful to young people and help them realise that change is easier than we might think. They have a poor understanding of which countries are emitting the most carbon dioxide per person. Actually, the Middle East petrostates are by far the worst, followed closely by the USA. China, that we point the finger at China, blame at China a lot of the time, but actually per person, they're not some of the biggest emitters. Again, we're pointing the finger of blame historical emissions of fossil fuels towards China, but actually the USA looks like it's going to keep that #1 spot for some time because China's radically, putting lots of funding into renewable energy, whereas we know we've just had the recent elections in the US and suggest that the US is going to be burning more fossil fuels than before. So, I think that the USA is probably going to keep that prime place for some time. In China, we point the finger at them, but actually they produce an awful lot of our manufactured goods. So we've offshored a lot of our manufacturing, which means our emissions are down, but China's go up accordingly. If we ask about reducing how we can individually reduce our gas emissions, 57% of young people think recycling is the way forward, whereas actually eating a plant-based or vegan diet is much, much better, 4 times better than recycling. There's a little dog in the background there because having a pet even has a climate impact, and we're not really looking at some of the smaller things that people think are not necessarily going to be a big deal, but are a big deal. So we need to discuss those in class to make sure people are really climate literate. Only 20% understand that the meaning of net zero is to balance human emissions and removals of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So we're not looking at that in enough detail. This is part of legislation. This should be a real understanding for young people. But actually, we're not discussing that enough, and we're definitely not discussing how we can remove this carbon dioxide safely from the environment. We talk about gas balance in biology and gas exchange. And when asked if a tree grows and falls down, it's burned locally, will there be? Most people seem to think it was approximately the same. Oh, sorry, most people thought that more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere than before the tree grew, whereas actually it'll be about the same. So we've got to look at these nature-based solutions. Where should we be getting our energy from? Is burning trees the right way forward? Is it causing more particulate pollution? There's lots and lots of areas for discussion, but we need to understand the basic science first. And finally, how much do we appreciate what the scientists are doing for us? Not enough. Only 22% recognise that between 80 and 100% of scientists say that climate change is human caused. Actually, the value is nearer 99% now. There's an awful lot in the media that causes, dither and delay about some of this scientific evidence. They looked at billions of data points. The evidence is overwhelming. We need to make sure that young people understand this and can understand what's causing it, why it's happening, what's going to happen in the future, and how to change it. That mitigation and adaptation is all important. So, to get young people to become climate literate, start as early as possible. The Ministry of Eco-Education has some fantastic resources from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 3, and we're producing more all the time. If you want proper science, hard science facts, the Royal Meteorological Society is definitely one of the best places to go. You can stay up to date with science and download some fantastic resources. Let's Go Zero, you could sign your school up to Let's Go Zero. They'll help you come up with a climate action plan, but then you can link it in. Why are we going more plant-based in the school canteen? And they'll understand why rather than just being imposed on them. You could also get the climate ambassadors in to maybe talk to your staff or to your students. There's a whole nother option there. So there's plenty to be done, plenty of action to be taken, and plenty of fun to be had. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.